I read about this couple that had some cracks in their walls, and so they hired a painter to come in to patch the cracks and to paint the walls, and he did a great job. You couldn't even tell where the cracks had been. But a few months later, they showed back up, so they hired a second painter to come in and to patch the cracks and to paint the walls. But this painter said, look, I can patch the cracks, but your problem is not a crack in the wall problem. Your problem is a foundation problem. And until the real issue is dealt with, the cracks really aren't going to go anywhere. And there are some couples who try to avoid conflict at all costs. In an effort to keep the cracks in the walls covered, opinions aren't expressed, feelings aren't shared, anger isn't resolved, bitterness just builds up. But until you deal with the real issues, until conflict is resolved in a healthy way, the cracks are still in the wall. When we ignore the cause of the cracks, we leave an opening for things to get worse, and before long, they can seem beyond repair.
Hi.
Can I help you?
Well, you actually already have, Jed. I just, I
don't smoke. And I definitely don't sleep with groupies, so just...
You just have no idea, do you?
About what?
You know, normally I would be really, really offended. But you are just so cute. And now I get to have a secret, and that's always fun, isn't it?
Okay. It's good to meet you. Whatever your name is. This whole thing is great.
No, I know. I just thought I'd introduce you.
Unresolved conflict in the home has a way of making a husband or wife more vulnerable to temptation outside the home. See, we try to avoid conflict because we're afraid that it will hurt our relationship. But in reality, it's avoiding conflict that does the damage. And so the real question is, how are you going to deal with conflict when it arises? In Song of Solomon, chapter 5, we learn to deal with conflict in a way that deepens the intimacy in our marriage and strengthens the foundation of our homes.
Come on!
There are a number of issues in marriage that can cause conflict, but many of them would fall under the general category of unmet or unrealistic expectations. Hollywood hasn't really helped us with this. Think about how many movies or TV shows you've watched that culminate in a wedding, but they really don't show the realities of marriage. And then the whole wedding and honeymoon process doesn't help. On the wedding day, the bride has been taken away for a manicure and pedicure. She's gotten her hair done. She looks perfect. As she walks down the aisle, everyone stands and looks at her, and they're all thinking the same thing. They're all thinking, she's never gonna look this good again in her life. Everyone's thinking that except for the groom, who is thinking she's gonna wake up this way the next morning. And then they're whisked away to this exotic destination for a honeymoon where they take long, romantic walks on the beach. And they have candlelit dinners at night, and they sleep in cuddled up together. They come back from that, and it doesn't take long for reality to set in. One of the areas that would fall under this category of unrealistic expectations that causes a lot of conflict in marriage is the frequency of romance and sex. And that's true for our couple in the Song of Solomon. Solomon comes home after a long day at work. He knocks on the bedroom door and says, Open to me, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. Well, his bride immediately knows what he has on his mind, but it's been a long day for her too, and she just wants to rest. So she says to him in verse 3, I've taken off my robe, must I put it on again? Translation, I've got a headache. There tends to be something within us that is attracted to someone who's much different than we are. You've heard it said that opposites attract. I think that's true. I mean, how many marriages do you know where one person is more unorganized and messy and the other person is more structured and organized? Or one person's a night owl, the other person's an early bird. Or one person is loud and outgoing, the other is more quiet and reserved. We're very different. And when two very different people get married, it's only a matter of time until conflicts start to rise. But what if God gave you a spouse who was much different than you, not because he wants you to be unhappy, but because he wants you to be holy, to be mature, to be complete? Paul writes in Ephesians that we need to be humble and gentle with one another, making room for each other's differences because of our love. And he goes on to say in Ephesians that when we don't deal with conflict in a healthy way, it gives the devil a foothold, and a foothold is really all the devil needs.
That was awesome. So good.
Oh, thank you.
I knew you were good, but that was ridiculous.
Thank you.
Do you know any more of my song?
Okay, I always thought the song needed a lady's touch. How about y'all?
That may be true, but I don't see a lady up here right now.
Jed, you just try to sing the song and I'll see what I can do.
I've been waiting for you to come along, seeing notes on a page, but not the song. Had a hold of my heart, hanging so strong, only a woman like you.
When there's conflict, we often have no trouble identifying how our spouse needs to change. And we have certain tools we use to try to fix them. We get sarcastic, we lay on the guilt, or maybe you raise your voice and make demands, or you just withdraw completely.
Welcome home.
Thank you. Where's Ray?
He's asleep.
Good. Hi.
I'm really tired, Jed.
Me too. I'm exhausted. I've been gone a long time.
How long are you home this time?
The tour was great, Rose. Thanks for asking. Had a great time.
Well, I know how the tour was. I have the internet. That's how I get to know my husband.
You have the money too, right?
You think that's what I care about?
I think you care about your dad, and I can feel it every time I'm laying in bed by myself.
Thinking about all you care about.
Rose, if that was all I cared about, I could get it. I wouldn't have to come home.
In this chapter, we find several principles to help us deal with conflict in a healthier way. One principle is simply to keep perspective. I'm amazed at how often we will make a big deal out of something that is really quite insignificant. The Bible says to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Sometimes we just need to smile to ourselves and say, you know what? It's no big deal. Another principle is to understand that it's not your job to change your spouse. Sometimes we think if I yell loud enough, if I nag long enough, then my husband or wife will be the person I want them to be. But Solomon wrote in Proverbs and said, a nagging wife is like a constant dripping. It's like you're waterboarding your husband. It doesn't work. But he says kind words bring life. And so that's the third principle, is to use encouraging words whenever possible. Now, I know that in the middle of a conflict, it's unrealistic to think that you're going to say nice and positive, encouraging things about the other person. But if you're doing that at all the other times, it makes conflict much healthier. But when the environment is a critical environment, it destroys intimacy and it intensifies every conflict.
Can we at least talk first? Hi, honey. How was your day? How was your year?
Don't exaggerate, okay? Don't act like I haven't seen you all year and we haven't had this same fight every 2 or 3 weeks.
No, those times I was trying to get you to do something romantic.
I was just trying to do something romantic.
To ask you to talk or do something else besides just walk in and grab me.
How awful for you to feel desired by your spouse. It's a terrible thing.
Just leave me alone, Jed.
Forgive my insensitivity, Rose, but I don't have a lot of experience in that recently. Maybe you can tell me what that's like.
Leave me alone, Jed!
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that.
In the Song of Solomon, the husband seems to respond pretty well to the rejection from his wife, but my guess is that's because it wasn't the norm. In fact, we know from the previous chapter that she was very responsive to him sexually. But if this had gone on for weeks or for months, it probably would have ended much differently. That's one of the reasons why the Apostle Paul writes to husbands and wives in Corinthians, and he reminds them that their bodies don't belong to themselves, but to each other, and not to deprive each other sexually because it opens the door to temptation in their marriage. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon says to married people, drink water from your own well. That's his metaphor to warn against adultery. But what happens when one spouse shuts down the well? Well, it opens up the door to temptation for the other spouse. And so what we have is a warning for husbands and wives to put each other's needs ahead of their own. Now, it's not an excuse for them to be selfish or demanding, but it's an encouragement to always put each other's needs first. A few years ago, a major storm came through the area, and it blew over my neighbor's big tree, landed right on his house. It was a huge mess. The next day, he was out cleaning it up, and so I went over and said to him, that must have been some storm to knock over a tree of this size. But he said, no, it wasn't the storm. And he took me over and he showed me where the tree had been decaying from the inside out for years. I thought it was one storm, but it had been dying a long time. Sometimes when a marriage falls apart, we look at the moment it falls and we think, what happened? But the truth is, most often, it's been happening for a long time. The conflict just became too much. So how do we build a marriage that is strong enough to withhold the inevitable conflict that comes our way? Well, in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon gives us this wisdom. He says, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Typically, we think of marriage as a union of 2, the husband and the wife, but I want you to think of it as a union of 3, the husband, the wife, and Jesus Christ. Because if you're experiencing some conflict, some turmoil, if it feels like the tree has fallen, this is where you need to begin. Invite Jesus into your home. Invite him into your conversation. Let him teach you the unforced rhythms of grace, because I think you'll find that more than anything else, that 3rd strand makes all the difference.